You're watching All 24 News World News program, broadcasting to you live from the capital, Algiers. To the headlines. Algeria slams Mali's petition to the International Court of Justice, calling it a shameful and contradictory move by the junta to escape responsibility for the tragedy it's inflicting on its own people. Also in our news, dozens killed in new Gaza massacres as the UN warns of 28,000 malnourished children. Hamas condemns the US veto, calling it a green light for genocide. And the UN Security Council rejects a permanent lifting of sanctions on Iran. Tehran says the move undermines diplomacy and accuses Europe of abusing the snapback mechanism. All this and more shortly. Welcome back. Algeria has called out the Malian junta's lawsuit at the International Court of Justice as a blatant paradox, pointing out that the same authorities who trampled constitutional legitimacy at home are now pretending to uphold it abroad. In a statement, Algeria's foreign ministry said the junta has driven Mali into a political, economic, and security catastrophe, calling it the main driver of the country's comprehensive moral bankruptcy.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs notes a flagrant contradiction in the Malian junta's move. The paradox lies in the fact that the Malian junta, which has trampled on legitimacy and constitutional law within its own country, pretends to care about the very law it despises domestically and falsely claims to adhere to it at the international level. The ministry also notes that the same junta has led Mali into political, economic, and security disaster and is, at the same time, the main driver of a comprehensive moral bankruptcy.
The Algerian Foreign Ministry said the Malian junta's move to the International Court of Justice is a desperate attempt to exploit the court and escape responsibility for the tragedy it has inflicted on its own country.
The Malian junta's recourse to the International Court of Justice clearly reveals an attempt to exploit this prestigious judicial body of the United Nations in a desperate effort to find a scapegoat to escape its responsibility for the tragedy it is inflicting on brotherly Mali.
In a similar note, Algeria condemned the Malian junta's maneuver, vowing not to be part of it and stressing that the International Court of Justice cannot be subjected to such blatant manipulation. The Foreign Ministry said Algiers will officially notify the court of its rejection of these tactics.
This maneuver is so rude that it is hard to believe. Algeria will not be part of it and condemns its insolent nature. Algeria, which holds international law in the highest regard and has deep respect for International Court of Justice, affirms that it is its duty not to allow this court to become the object of blatant and ridiculous manipulation. Consequently, and at the appropriate time, Algeria will inform the International Court of Justice of its rejection of these manipulative actions.
Tonight in Gaza, medical sources reported Friday that Zionist occupation forces have killed 43 Palestinians since dawn, including 19 in Gaza City, with dozens more wounded, many in critical condition. They added that air raids struck several areas across the Strip, destroying residential buildings and infrastructure and leaving more civilian deaths and injuries. Palestinians are being forcibly displaced from northern Gaza to the south, a dangerous journey under constant heavy Zionist shelling that has already killed thousands before they reach safety. Usama Ayadi has the full story.
Here is Gaza, where the pain of humanity is carried on shoulders, walking along paths of death and displacement toward the unknown. Palestinians are trapped between the remains of their destroyed homes and a sky raining with fire bullets and missiles. On a path toward the unknown, thousands of Gazans flee south, burdened with the weight of genocide and pain, walking dangerous paths in search of a refuge for a while.
We ended up living on the street. We left our land and homes. Everything was destroyed. It fell on us. We were in schools and the schools fell on us. We fled from under death. What is our fault?
Amid the continued bombardment by the Zionist occupation's air force and the intensification of its raid on every inch of the strip, the displaced endure various forms of suffering on their way to southern Gaza or to what the entity falsely calls safe areas. Life in Gaza is becoming increasingly difficult for its people in a catastrophic scene. Their beds are the ground and they have no roof or cover but the sky.
These children, what is their fault? Are they Hamas also? What is their fault that they are displaced with us? Their lives have been lost. Their education has been lost.
Between the hope of clinging to life and the search for a lifeline, Palestinians cry out in anguish at the prolonged Zionist genocide in which they have lost family, loved ones, and everything they own. The brutal, bloodthirsty occupation persists in setting death traps in the path of the displaced or the martyrs' projects. Zionist killing methods are numerous, and those targeted are innocent Palestinians.
Hamas al-Qassam brigades say they have destroyed Zionist military vehicles by luring them into a pre-planted explosive field east of the Saftawi junction in northern Gaza.
ونستعرض الأعمار خيلا أمامنا يا رب سلم يا رب سلم يا رب سلم اللهم سدد على أيدينا اللهم أثخن على أيدينا يا رب العالمين. الله أكبر ولله الحمد الله أكبر ولله الحمد.
The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said Friday that around 28,000 cases of acute malnutrition were diagnosed among children in Gaza Strip in July and August alone, surpassing the total recorded in the first half of the year. OCHA warned this sharp rise reflects a rapid and alarming deterioration in children's health under the war and blockade. Hamas condemned the U.S. veto at the UN Security Council, calling it a green light for occupying Israel to continue its genocide in Gaza. In a statement, the movement declared that Washington's use of the veto to block the resolution represents a complicity in the occupation's crimes, while praising the 10 countries that backed the resolution and urging them to keep pressure on Netanyahu's government to end the aggression on the Strip.
The use of the veto by the U.S. administration to block a draft resolution at the UN Security Council calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip constitutes blatant collusion and full partnership in the crime of genocide committed by the Zionist occupation against our Palestinian people. It also serves as a green light for the continuation of killings, starvation, and the brutal criminal assault on Gaza City. We value the position of the 10 countries that submitted the draft resolution to the Security Council, and we call on them, as well as on all states and international bodies, to continue exerting pressure on the war criminal Netanyahu and his government to halt their aggression, to prevent the continuation of the UN-documented genocide, and to ensure that the leaders of the occupation are held accountable before the International Criminal Court.
Similarly, the Palestinian presidency has condemned the U.S. for once again blocking a UN Security Council ceasefire resolution. The spokesman Nabila Borodina said this use of the veto empowers the Israeli occupation to continue its crimes and defy international law, including the International Court of Justice's order against the Zionist entity to halt its aggression. He stated that this makes the Zionist occupation responsible for the ongoing assault on the Palestinian people. The UK has expressed its disappointment after the UN Security Council failed to adopt a resolution demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Britain's ambassador Barbara Ward said her country voted for the measure, which stressed the urgent need to end the humanitarian suffering. She called on the Israeli occupation to stop its military operation and remove barriers to aid, reaffirming Britain's commitment to working for a peace that includes an independent Palestinian state. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says Spain will back a European move to freeze trade deals with occupying Israel. Following a meeting in Madrid, Sanchez stated that Israel's claim it is fighting a war to defeat Hamas is false, stating the devastating death toll of at least 60,000 casualties in Gaza. He said Spain's position is driven by both geopolitical and human rights concerns.
In
relation to the proposal by the Presidency of the European Commission, the position of the Spanish government is clear. We agree. In fact, for more than a year now, we have been requesting the European Commission to suspend the Strategic Association Agreement between the European Union and Israel, as we believe that one of the most important articles, which is the obligation to respect international humanitarian law, was being violated by the government of Israel.
A majority of UN General Assembly member states voted to allow President Mahmoud Abbas to address the body with a recorded speech during its 80th session next Thursday. The Assembly also approved his participation by video link in Monday's two-state solution conference after U.S. authorities denied entry visas to him and several Palestinian officials. The UN's peacekeeping force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, strongly condemned the Zionist raids on southern Lebanon, calling them a blatant violation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701 and a direct threat to the region's fragile stability. In a statement, the force urged the occupation to halt military operations and commit to a full withdrawal from Lebanese territory, warning that continued escalation endangers efforts to restore stability. Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem said Friday that the Zionist occupation has reached the height of criminality, violating all humanitarian, legal, and international norms with full U.S. backing. In a televised address, he stressed that the resistance targets only the occupation, not Lebanon or any other party, and affirmed readiness to stand alongside the Lebanese army in confronting the aggression.
أدعو المملكة العربية السعودية.
I call on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to turn a new page with the resistance based on the following principles. First, a dialogue that addresses the problems, addresses fears, and secures interests. Second, a dialogue based on the fact that Israel is the enemy, not the resistance. Third, a dialogue that freezes past disputes, at least during this exceptional period, so that we can confront Israel and curb it.
And as you followed in our tonight's headlines, a majority of UN Security Council members on Friday rejected a draft resolution to permanently lift sanctions on Iran. Russia, China, Pakistan, and Algeria voted in favor, while none other countries opposed and 2 abstained. With just 8 days left, Tehran and the European Troika are still negotiating whether to delay or reactivate the sanctions snapback mechanism. Iran has sharply condemned a move by the European powers to reimpose sanctions, calling the action illegal, unjustified, and provocative. The Iranian Foreign Ministry statement came after a majority of UN Security Council members voted against extending the lifting of sanctions. Iran accused the European Troika, France, Germany, and the UK of undermining diplomatic efforts after they moved to restore sanctions, accusing Tehran of violating the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran's UN ambassador Amir Saeed Aravani denounced the Security Council's failure to extend the resolution lifting sanctions on Tehran, calling it illegal and a violation of international law. Speaking at this session, he said the divided Security Council vote shows a lack of consensus, warning that the decision undermines diplomacy and threatens serious consequences for non-proliferation.
The door for diplomacy is not closed, but it will be Iran, not the adversaries, who decides with whom and on what basis to engage.
Algeria has called for a diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear issue, warning that any other path carries grave risks for the Middle East and global security. Speaking at a UN Security Council vote on lifting sanctions, Algeria's deputy ambassador stressed his country's firm commitment to the peaceful settlement of disputes as the basis of its vote.
إن أي بديل للتسوية السلمية للملف النووي الإيراني.
Any alternative to a peaceful settlement of the Iranian nuclear file entails serious risks and devastating consequences for the Middle East, as well as for international peace and security. At this critical juncture, the Security Council must keep its focus on the preservation of peace and security as our highest priority. In this regard, we remain firmly convinced that the imposition of additional pressures at this stage could prove counterproductive and risk triggering an escalating that would undermine ongoing diplomatic efforts.
قد تقوض الجهود الدبلوماسية.
Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Saeed Khatibzadeh slammed the European decision to reimpose sanctions on Tehran by month's end, calling it politically motivated discrimination. Speaking in Geneva on Friday, he said Europe is committing mistakes on several levels and accused it of abusing the nuclear deal's mechanism, stressing that Iran firmly rejects this approach. Shifting focus to the war in Sudan now, at least 75 people were killed and hundreds injured early Friday when rapid support forces shelled displaced people in North Darfur. 8 sources said an RSF convoy bombed a mosque in Abu Shuk camp near Al-Fashir as worshippers gathered for dawn prayers, leaving dozens dead and many more wounded. The UN Human Rights Office said Friday that civilian deaths in Sudan rose sharply in the first half of the year amid escalating violence. Li Feng, from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Sudan, told reporters in Geneva that new reports of atrocities arrive daily. A fresh report by the UN body documented at least 3,384 civilian deaths between January and June, most of them in Darfur. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres described the suffering of the Sudanese people as horrific, urging Security Council to take firm action. In an interview with Reuters, he called on major powers within the Council to assume their responsibilities and stressed the urgent need for the international community to play a leading role in advancing peace and stability.
Conflicts are multiplying in the context of the suffering of the Sudanese people is horrible. So I think it's time for the Security Council to be able to take, with the agreement of all the key powers, very tough measures on Sudan to make those Sudanese parties understand that what they are doing is a crime against their own people.
Looking Eastern Europe now, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova rejected accusations that Moscow was behind provocations or deliberate escalation involving drones in Polish territory. She called the claims baseless and criticized the West for rushing to blame Russia without seeking the facts. Zakharova also held Western governments responsible for complicity in hostile acts by supplying drones to Kyiv. Ukraine says it has made tangible progress in talks with the United States and European allies on binding security guarantees to end the war with Russia. Foreign Minister Serhiy Kislitsia told Reuters a bilateral deal with Washington is vital, praising President Donald Trump's commitment. Proposals include strengthening Ukraine's army, deploying foreign forces, funding weapons, and expanding intelligence sharing.
I think that we are making progress, and I may agree with those who say that the progress is not enough or not as expedient as we would wish it to be, but we do make progress. And I think that the breakthrough moment was during the meeting in Washington, D.C., when the Americans, President Trump himself, reconfirmed that the Americans would be part of the security guarantees.
NATO said 3 Russian warplanes that violated Estonian airspace have been intercepted by the military alliance. Estonia's foreign ministry condemned the incident as brazen violation, stating that 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets unlawfully entered the airspace of a NATO member. According to the ministry, the aircraft flew over the Gulf of Finland on Friday and remained in the restricted area for 12 minutes without authorization.
If Russian fighter jets entering to the NATO airspace, so it is a threat. And also NATO responded in a very adequate ways. NATO fighters went up, and of course we had all the readiness to respond. But yes, happily they were escorted after 12 minutes out from NATO airspace. And if you have Russian fighters in your airspace, if you ask, is it a threat? Of course it is a threat.
The European Commission unveiled a new package of sanctions against Moscow aimed at pressuring it to end the war in Ukraine. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the goal is to force Russia into a ceasefire and back to negotiations. The measures target the energy sector, imposing a full ban on Russian liquefied natural gas imports to Europe and a bid to cut off Moscow's war funding.
Our economic analysis is clear. Our sanctions are severely affecting the Russian economy. The interest rate is at 17%. Inflation is persistingly high. Russian access to finance and revenues are consistently decreasing. And Russia's overheated war economy is coming to its limit. Even more interesting is that when speaking directly with partners that speak to Russians, they say that among the first Russian request is sanction relief. So we know that our sanctions are an effective tool of economic pressure. And we will keep using them till Russia comes to the negotiation table with Ukraine for just and lasting peace.
The Chinese news agency Xinhua said Chinese President Xi Jinping had said that Beijing and Washington can achieve mutual success and shared prosperity. Xinhua added that Chinese and U.S. leaders had a phone call in which they had an in-depth exchange of views on bilateral relations and issues of common concern, and provided strategic guidance for the stable development of bilateral ties in the next stage. It is time to catch up on more international news stories in the News in Brief with Nabil Khazini.
The 12th Beijing Xiangshan Forum wrapped up on Friday after 3 days of comprehensive discussions focused on upholding international order and promoting peaceful development. The event brought together over 1,800 participants from more than 100 countries. Key topics included establishing a fair and balanced global security governance framework, strengthening strategic trust and security collaboration in the Asia-Pacific region, protecting the international order and global stability, and advancing regional peace through dialogue and consultation. The death toll from the last week's explosion of a tanker truck carrying liquefied petroleum gas in a densely populated area of Mexico City has risen to 25, according to the local health authorities. The number of victims has been increasing since last Wednesday, when the truck exploded while traveling along a busy thoroughfare in Iztapalapa, the most populous borough in the Mexican capital. The Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, the United States Army, and the Australian Army conducted live mortar fire drill during a joint trilateral military exercise in central Japan on Friday. The drill was part of a training exercise named Orient Shield 2025, an annual bilateral military exercise. This year is the first time the Australian military has joined the exercise.
And that wraps up tonight's program. For the latest updates, stay connected with us on our social media platforms. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.